It was the sound that started it all. A thick, metallic bang, like a cannon going off in the suburbs. Every bird in Pine Needle Estates took off in synchronized panic. The dogs started howling 3 streets over. And even old Mr. Murphy dropped his gardening shears. That bang was my grandfather, Jack Madison, slamming our garage door shut with the fury of 1,000 HOA violations. But it wasn't just any garage door slam. No. This one locked in 2 massive commercial trucks inside our family garage. And those trucks? They belonged to Karen Delaney, the high-heeled, clipboard-wielding tyrant who ran the HOA like she was auditioning for a suburban dictatorship. Grandpa didn't just slam that door. He declared war. It had all begun, ironically enough, with muffins. Blueberries, store-bought, and offensively dry muffins Karen had left on our doorstep with a note taped to the box that read, "Friendly reminder. Your trash bins were left out too long again. Also, I'll be using your garage this week for HOA equipment storage. Per temporary Ordinance 42B. Much appreciated." Now, most people would have called this bizarre, maybe even illegal. Grandpa called it a personal attack. "She's trying to claim territory," he said, pacing in the kitchen, chewing a toothpick like it owed him money. "Next thing you know, she'll annex the lawn and declare your bedroom a community conference room." We thought he was joking. We thought Karen was exaggerating. Until the trucks showed up. 2 of them. Big, ugly things that looked like they had driven straight out of a military-grade surveillance commercial. One black, one gray, no visible markings except for a small HOA logo painted near the back wheel. Karen waved at us cheerfully from her Lexus as they backed into our driveway. Then, like it was the most normal Tuesday morning in America, the drivers opened our garage and parked them inside. Grandpa didn't speak for a full 2 minutes, which for him was concerning. Then he said 5 words I'll never forget. "Get me the padlocks, boy." You'd think I'd have stopped him, called someone, reasoned with him. But when a man who once disarmed a live grenade using duct tape and a fishing lure asks you for padlocks, you don't argue. You just hand them over. With a mechanical precision I didn't know a 77-year-old man could still possess, Grandpa locked the garage doors, both manual and electric, and then jammed a metal bar across the inside. He didn't stop there. He wrapped a chain through the side handles, triple-knotted it, and zip-tied the ends like he was sealing up a crime scene. Then he stood back, wiped his hands on a rag, and said, "Let's see your temporary ordinance override that." 20 minutes later, Karen came back. She walked up our driveway, wearing what I can only describe as a power blouse and war paint. Clipboard in hand, smile like a paper cut. "Jack," she said sweetly, "those trucks are HOA property. You can't legally." Before she could finish, Grandpa lifted the phone to his ear. "Yeah, Sheriff? I got 2 unauthorized vehicles on private property. Might be an attempted hostile acquisition. Might also be domestic terrorism. Hard to say these days." Karen's smile cracked like old paint. Now, Pine Needle Estates isn't exactly the sort of place that sees a lot of police action. The most dramatic thing that had happened in recent years was when Mrs. Trenton's poodle got into her wine stash and started aggressively humping the mayor's leg at the 4th of July barbecue. So when the sheriff's cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac 10 minutes later, people came out like it was parade day. Sheriff Dale stepped out his car, one hand on his belt, the other holding his coffee like it was too early for whatever this was. He took one look at the trucks, then at Karen's expression, then at Grandpa's crossed arms and said, "Well, looks like I walked into a homeowner's feud again." Karen marched over to him, waving a stack of printed pages that smelled like toner and delusion. "These are the HOA regulations. Section 12.4c clearly states that in the event of equipment overflow." Grandpa interrupted. "They ain't equipment. They're trucks. My garage ain't a depot, and my grandson ain't a warehouse manager." Dale raised an eyebrow at me. I shrugged. They didn't even ask. Karen turned on me like a hawk spotting a wounded mouse. "You're a minor. You don't have authority in property disputes." Grandpa snapped. He's 17. Fought off a black bear with a rake last summer. That earns him more authority than you'll ever have. The sheriff sighed. All right. Everyone cool it. Karen, technically speaking, unless you have written, signed consent, You can't just store things in someone's garage. Even under HOA rule, private property takes precedence. Karen sputtered like someone just unplugged her from the grid. But I am the HOA. I issued the ordinance. And I, Grandpa said, locked the door. The trucks were stuck. Karen was furious. The sheriff shrugged and left with a warning to settle it civilly. But nothing about what followed was civil. That night, Karen tried to cut the chain. I heard her outside around midnight, whispering like a cartoon villain. But Grandpa was waiting. He turned on the motion sensor sprinklers. She got blasted so hard she slipped, landed in a puddle, and screamed so loud even the raccoons fled. By the next morning, neighborhood gossip was on fire. Mrs. Pine from across the street baked us a cake that said Team Grandpa. Someone printed t-shirts. Karen wasn't just mad. She was planning retaliation. I could see it in her eyes as she marched back to her Lexus. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And neither was the mystery. Because when Grandpa and I peeked into one of the trucks, just for curiosity's sake, we didn't find boxes of folding chairs or HOA banners like Karen claimed. We found what looked like surveillance gear. Monitors, cameras, labeled folders, files, things labeled with names, neighborhood names. That's when Grandpa said the second sentence I'll never forget. Son, we ain't just dealing with a power-tripping lawn queen anymore. We're dealing with something big, possibly federal. And that's how we went from HOA complaints to locking down Karen's mystery trucks and uncovering what might be the biggest suburban scandal our town has ever seen. All because Karen couldn't keep her trucks and her nose out of our garage. The morning after the great garage lockdown, things in Pine Needle Estates felt less like suburbia and more like the opening act of a suburban Cold War. Neighbors were whispering, peeking out from behind blinds, and walking their dogs extra slowly past our house, as if they might catch a glimpse of the famous lock trucks or Grandpa booby-trapping the driveway with garden gnomes. Karen, for her part, was not one to let defeat soak in for long. She reappeared at exactly 9:02 a.m., freshly coiffed and dressed in an aggressively pink pantsuit, marching up to our mailbox like she was leading an HOA military parade. She slipped a formal-looking envelope into the box and marched off without a word. The envelope contained an official HOA summons. Apparently, we were to attend an emergency board meeting that evening to discuss our ongoing obstruction of community resources and unneighborly behavior. Grandpa read it out loud, laughed for a solid 30 seconds, then used it to scoop up a particularly defiant squirrel turd from the bird feeder. "We're going," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "But we ain't going quietly." Meanwhile, the trucks remained untouched, locked, silent, but something about them didn't sit right. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange equipment inside, the surveillance gear, the manila folders with names on them. Why did the HOA even have that stuff? What were they doing with it? Grandpa had theories, of course. He always had theories. One involved a secret HOA cult that started in the late 90s, complete with robes made out of lawn care uniforms. Another involved Karen being part of a secret government HOA training program, like the CIA, but with hedge clippers. I thought he was joking, until I caught him in the garage late that afternoon, sketching out a full timeline on the back of a pizza box and pinning it to the wall with a magnet shaped like a smiling taco. When we showed up at the emergency board meeting, it felt like walking into a trap. The HOA clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs had been arranged in an accusatory semicircle. Karen stood at the front beneath a poster that read Community First, preserving order in our homes. She gave us a smile that made my skin crawl. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how many clauses were buried in the fine print and had every intention of weaponizing them. "Thank you all for coming," she said, flipping through a stack of papers. "We're here to discuss a matter of urgent community importance. As many of you are aware, Jack Madison has unlawfully detained HOA property and disrupted our operational integrity." Grandpa leaned back in his chair, arms folded, sunglasses on, despite the fact we were indoors. "Operational integrity," he said. "Karen, you parked 2 mystery trucks in my garage without permission. You're lucky I didn't strip them for parts." Gasps from the room. Karen narrowed her eyes. Those vehicles contained valuable community equipment. Temporary placement was within my rights as acting HOA president. "Show me the paperwork," Grandpa said. She produced a sheaf of documents from her folder with a dramatic flourish, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. "Right here. Ordinance 42B, subsection E." Grandpa didn't even look. That ordinance was voted down in 2011. Karen blinked. "That's not possible. I was there. I vetoed it myself. The original copies laminated and stuck to my fridge." The room murmured. Someone in the back coughed, and another person whispered, "Is that true?" Karen's tight grip on the narrative was starting to fray, and she knew it. So she went for the big guns. "We will give the Madison household 48 hours to release the trucks, or we'll be forced to pursue legal action, including the possibility of fines, community service, and removal of privileges." Grandpa smiled. "Well, Karen, I've got two things to say to that. One, I haven't paid an HOA fine since 2008, and I'm not about to start now. And two, those trucks are evidence." That shut her up. He stood, removing a folded paper from his jacket pocket. It was a printout of photos we'd taken of the contents of the truck, rows of cameras, microphones, folders with names like Sanchez, fence violation, and Mills' cat issue. "These trucks," he continued, "are loaded with surveillance gear, hidden cameras, listening devices. I counted at least 3 folders with personal data about people in this very room." Now the murmuring became shouting. People jumped up from their seats. "What do you mean surveillance? Is this why Karen knew about my gnome collection? She fined me for a weed that didn't exist." Karen shouted over them. That information was collected legally through visual inspections and voluntary reports. Grandpa turned to the crowd. "Anyone here voluntarily report on their neighbors?" Dead silence. "I rest my case." Karen looked cornered for the first time since I'd known her. She gathered her papers in a flurry and stormed out, yelling something about slander and legal repercussions. By the time we got home, things had escalated. The front yard had become a community war zone. Someone spray-painted Spy Queen. By the time we returned home from the HOA chaos, our front yard had become the unofficial headquarters of a suburban uprising. Someone had spray-painted Spy Queen Karen on the sidewalk in pink chalk, complete with a badly drawn crown and fangs. A neighbor we barely knew from 3 doors down dropped off a casserole with no note, just a smile and a wink, like it was a secret code for "we're on your side." Even the local pizza guy gave Grandpa a free large with extra sausage, saying, "For the man who finally stood up to her." It would have been hilarious if it didn't also feel like we were being watched. Grandpa didn't waste time. The second we stepped inside, he locked the door, pulled the blinds, and turned the living room into what he called Command Center Alpha. He laid out the photos from the truck contents across the coffee table and started matching them with names from the HOA member list. I didn't even know he had a member list. Apparently, he'd kept every HOA mailer since 1999, filed alphabetically and color-coded for relevance. I always thought he was just a hoarder with a weird filing fetish. Turns out he was prepping for suburban warfare. The photos showed more than we'd realized. Not just cameras and audio gear. Some of it was disguised as lawn decorations. One birdhouse had a lens embedded in the perch. A garden frog with a tiny antenna poking from its back. A sprinkler head that looked normal until you zoomed in and noticed the pinhole. My grandpa was going through the images like a detective on a Netflix binge. Every so often he'd mutter, "She had this stuff set up right under their noses." This goes deeper than just a few HOA fines. I asked him why Karen would even bother with surveillance. What could she possibly want to know about people who argued over mailbox paint and lawn heights? He looked at me like I'd missed the entire plot of a movie halfway through. "Control," he said. "She's not just managing rules. She's manufacturing leverage." She knew about people's habits, secrets, arguments, even their pets. You know why Larry got fined for his dog barking at 3 a.m.? Karen knew when his daughter snuck out, and she used the dog as an excuse. It's not about violations, it's about compliance. It was a lot to digest. I stared at the pile of folders in the photos. Names of neighbors I'd grown up waving to. Some with violation titles, some with vague descriptions like possible affiliate, watcher, or neutral. One file stood out, ours. The label just said, Madison, contingency plan. We knew we had to see what was in that truck for ourselves. We'd only taken a quick peek before, but now we needed evidence. Actual evidence. Grandpa decided we'd wait until after dark. He didn't want to risk Karen pulling another stunt or calling in backup. Not that she had many allies left. Social media had turned on her fast. The HOA Facebook group was a meltdown. Every post evolved into finger-pointing and screenshot dumps of Karen's past fines, her suspiciously high HOA salary, and one very blurry photo of her kicking over someone's Halloween display in 2021. That night, under the cover of darkness and the loud hum of cicadas, Grandpa and I snuck into the garage. He unlocked the chains like a bank vault, motioned me to help him lift the metal bar, and slowly rolled up the door just enough for us to slip inside. The trucks loomed in the dark like sleeping beasts. Grandpa popped open the back of the gray one and flicked on a flashlight. We stepped in. The interior was packed wall to wall with boxes, equipment, and labeled drawers. It was organized, methodical. This wasn't someone dumping HOA gear. This was an operation. Grandpa opened a drawer marked Visual Logs, Zone B. Inside were stacks of DVDs, labeled by house number and date. Some of them went back over a year. He popped one into a portable player that was sitting nearby, and we watched grainy footage of a backyard. Nothing unusual, until we saw Mr. Simmons from Lot 6 pulling up flowers from his wife's garden and replacing them with plastic ones. He looked around guiltily, then shoved the real ones in a trash bag. I looked at Grandpa. This is creepy. He nodded. It gets worse. The next drawer had paper files. Black and white photos, some candid, some clearly taken with zoom lenses. Notes about personal routines, arguments, even illnesses. One file had a sticky note. Leverage, late taxes, mortgage default possible. It didn't take long to figure out Karen had dirt on almost everyone. Enough to threaten, coerce, or manipulate. Then we found the folder labeled Madison. It was thinner than I expected, but inside was a single sheet with a timeline of our family's HOA history. Every time Grandpa refused to pay a fine. Every time we skipped a mandatory meeting. Every sarcastic letter he'd mailed in response to a notice. At the bottom, one chilling line. Possible risk of disruption. If activated, engage plan. Engage plan. I whispered. What does that mean? Grandpa didn't answer. He just looked angry. Not loud angry. Quiet angry. The kind of angry where the gears in his head were turning faster than ever. We took photos of everything. Every folder, every log, every note. Then we locked the truck back up, sealed the garage, and retreated to the house without a word. Back inside, Grandpa finally spoke. We're not calling the police. Not yet. I didn't understand. Why not? We've got proof. This is illegal. Because the moment we call, we lose control. Karen's smart. If we don't do this carefully, she'll vanish before they can lay a hand on her. And if she gets the files back, we're toast. So what do? We go full neighborhood. Rally them. Get them on our side. But not with speeches or angry posts. We're going to give Karen enough rope to hang herself. Let her make a mistake. Then we catch her in the act. I paused. How? Grandpa leaned forward and grinned. We're going to bait the queen. That was the moment I realized we were in way over our heads. But I also knew there was no going back. We weren't just feuding with a nosy HOA president anymore. We were taking on a puppet master with a suburban spy ring, and the only weapons we had were a retired veteran, a 17-year-old kid, and a growing band of neighbors with nothing left to lose. Karen wanted order, but all she was about to get was chaos. Grandpa's plan wasn't exactly FBI level, but it was brilliant in its own chaotic old man way. We were going to stage an elaborate sting operation right under Karen's nose, using the one thing she couldn't resist, control. We figured if we fed her just the right amount of bait, something that looked like a crack in the neighborhood's order, she'd swoop in to fix it herself. And when she did, we'd catch her red-handed. But this wasn't going to be just a prank or a gotcha moment. It had to be airtight, public, and undeniable. Something she couldn't talk her way out of or bury under legal jargon and HOA bylaws. And so, Operation Neighborhood Watchdog was born. It started with a decoy violation. We chose the Kingsleys, two elderly retirees who hated drama but loved to be involved in absolutely everything. We told them to leave their trash cans at the curb for 3 straight days, put up an inflatable flamingo wearing sunglasses, and run a non-eco-friendly sprinkler during watering restriction hours. All cardinal sins according to the HOA Bible. Karen wouldn't be able to resist. She'd swoop in like a hawk with a ticket pad and a smile full of vengeance. What she didn't know was that we'd planted a small security camera inside the flamingo's sunglasses, aimed perfectly at the front walk. But even that wasn't enough. We needed to get inside HOA headquarters, Karen's garage-converted command post. That's where she kept the records, the tech backups, and probably the surveillance logs she hadn't yet stuffed into her trucks. Grandpa rallied a crew for the job. The team consisted of Mr. Dawson, who used to be a stage magician and claimed he could pick any lock with a paperclip and a piece of gum. Nina from across the street, who'd recently gone viral on TikTok for sneaking her emotional support goose into an airport. And Dee Dee, the cat lady with 11 feral cats, and a deep grudge against Karen for a series of escalating fines related to inappropriate meowing. The infiltration was set to happen during the HOA fundraiser disco night. Karen had organized it in a desperate bid to distract the neighborhood and prove she still had authority. Of course, she was expecting potlucks and polite applause. What she got was a full-blown chaotic dance party hosted by Nina, who turned it into a theme night complete with glow sticks, a fog machine, and an overly enthusiastic man named Greg who brought his own disco ball and claimed he once dated Donna Summer. As the neighborhood danced under multicolored lights, our team slipped away. Dawson worked the lock while Nina kept lookout, pretending to walk her goose named General Honk. Once inside, the garage was even more unnerving than we expected. Blueprints of neighborhood homes pinned on corkboards. A wall of photographs with post-it notes. A giant laminated HOA violation matrix. And in the corner, a locked filing cabinet that practically screamed Karen's dirty secrets inside. Dawson cracked it in under 5 minutes. Inside were files that made the ones in the truck look like light reading. We found spreadsheets tracking fines collected over 5 years, most of which hadn't been accounted for in the HOA's financial reports. There were receipts for surveillance purchases under vague expense labels like decorative enhancements and safety improvements. Even worse, we found a thumb drive labeled insurance, Karen only. Grandpa didn't hesitate. He slipped it into his pocket and nodded. Let's go. Back at the party, everything was hitting its peak. The fog machine was pumping like it had something to prove. The General Honk was honking in sync with the beat, and someone had challenged Karen to a dance-off, which she accepted with terrifying confidence. She actually won, but no one clapped. They were too busy watching her flail and spin like a malfunctioning Roomba. She stormed off shortly after, probably because someone slipped a note into her purse that read, "We know what's in the trucks." That night, Grandpa and I sat in the garage going through the thumb drive. It was worse than we imagined. Audio files of private conversations recorded from hidden mics, some of them clearly from inside homes. Personal information, birthdays, social security numbers, employment data, compiled and categorized. She'd been building digital profiles on half the neighborhood. It was beyond just power-hungry. It was a full-blown surveillance operation run by a woman whose idea of dinner was plain toast, and who once fined someone for planting non-native tulips. We had everything we needed, but Grandpa wasn't ready to go public yet. He wanted one final piece, something that couldn't be denied, a live catch, a moment of truth. And that meant triggering Karen to make a move while everyone was watching. So we planted fake information. A phony letter addressed to Grandpa from a fictional real estate company, claiming he was selling the house to a developer planning to build a duplex. We made sure the letter was placed right at the edge of the trash can outside, folded just right for someone snooping through garbage to find. Karen took the bait. That very night, we spotted her on the hidden camera in the flamingo sunglasses, rifling through the Kingsley's mail and pulling out the fake letter. She scanned it with a pocket light, took a photo, and stormed off. The next morning, a brand new HOA notice appeared on our door, citing pending property violations due to structural instability concerns, along with a thinly veiled threat that selling the property without community consultation was a breach of Bylaw 37F. We knew we had her. She'd acted on false intel, illegally accessed a neighbor's mail, and issued threats based on private documents that didn't exist. It was time. Grandpa called a special community meeting in the park. Dozens showed up. People brought lawn chairs, lemonade, and righteous anger. Karen arrived last looking smug until Grandpa stepped onto a makeshift podium, 2 stacked coolers, and began showing everything. The surveillance photos, the audio recordings, the financial files, even the footage of Karen digging through mailboxes. Her face went pale, then red, then white again. She tried to interrupt, shouting about doctored evidence and slander, but no one was listening. They had seen the files. They had heard the tapes. And just when it seemed like she might claw her way out, a new voice spoke up from the back of the crowd. It was Julia, Karen's former assistant. Quiet, unassuming, always polite. She stepped forward with her own folder. "I helped her do it," she said. "I kept the backups. I can prove everything." Karen didn't speak. She just turned and walked away, not even bothering to deny it. That silence was the sound of a kingdom collapsing. The trucks still sat in our garage, but Karen no longer had the power to claim them. The sheriff arrived an hour later. He'd been watching the whole thing from the shade, sipping iced tea. He took the thumb drive, the files, and Karen's keys. It wasn't just a win. It was the fall of an empire. But Grandpa, of course, wasn't done yet. He leaned over and whispered, "Now comes the cleanup. Let's see what happens when you take the queen off the board." By the next morning, the whole of Pine Needle Estates had changed. It felt like the fog had lifted after years of walking blindfolded through rules, fines, and silent fear. People were smiling again, waving to each other with the easy comfort of shared relief. Kids rode their bikes without looking over their shoulders, and someone even dared to leave their recycling bin out on the wrong day, almost proudly. It wasn't defiance anymore, it was freedom. But as Grandpa had warned, the battle might have ended. But the cleanup was only just beginning. Karen hadn't been arrested, at least not yet. The sheriff took the evidence, promised an investigation, and left with the kind of slow nod that said he was probably going to enjoy every minute of the takedown. But bureaucracy moves slow, and Karen wasn't about to slink off into exile without one last gasp. Her house, once the sterile heart of HOA order, now looked like a bunker. Curtains always drawn. No car in the driveway. No lawn gnome to greet the morning sun. Just silence and the faint paranoia that something was still brewing behind those walls. Grandpa, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with purpose. He said the neighborhood couldn't just return to normal. It needed structure, yes, but the right kind. Something built by the people, not imposed by someone who thinks laminated bylaws are more sacred than the Constitution. And that's how the idea of a neighborhood tribunal was born. It sounded ridiculous at first, like something out of a bad reality show, but somehow it caught on. People were hungry for closure, for something to cement the shift from fear to fairness. They wanted a reckoning, not out of vengeance, but out of a deep, aching need to reclaim control. Grandpa was nominated to lead the tribunal, naturally, but he refused. Said he'd rather be the guy behind the scenes pulling strings than the one giving speeches. So the role of judge was given, through a vote that involved paper ballots and a guy dressed as George Washington, to Mrs. Delaney from Lot 19. No relation to Karen, thank God. She was sharp, fair, and had a no-nonsense attitude that made even the most opinionated neighbors shut up when she spoke. The tribunal was set to be held in the park, the same one where Karen's rule had crumbled. Folding chairs were set in a circle. A makeshift podium was built out of milk crates. There were snack tables, lemonade pitchers, and even DJ who agreed to provide background music, which resulted in several awkward moments when Eye of the Tiger played during opening statements. But no one minded. There was something magical about seeing the community come together, not in fear, but in shared purpose. Karen was summoned. The notice was hand-delivered by 3 neighborhood kids on scooters, wearing makeshift sashes that read Suburban Peace Patrol. She didn't answer the door, but the garage camera caught her taking the letter and slamming the door. We weren't sure she'd show up. We thought maybe she'd flee, vanish into some HOA witness protection program. But when the time came, she arrived. She wore black. Not elegant, classy black, more like daytime soap villain black. Black pantsuit, black sunglasses, even a black binder in her hand. She didn't speak to anyone, just walked straight to the center of the circle and stood silently, waiting. Mrs. Delaney opened the proceedings with the seriousness of a Supreme Court judge. She acknowledged the public record, the files, the testimony from Karen's former assistant, and the overwhelming evidence gathered over the past few weeks. Karen was offered the chance to speak. She didn't flinch. "I was protecting this neighborhood," she said coldly. "Order doesn't come from people doing what they want. It comes from rules. And if I had to stretch those rules to keep this place from falling into chaos, so be it." There was a long silence, not because anyone agreed, but because they couldn't believe she was still trying to justify it. Someone from the back of the crowd shouted, "You fined me for a wind chime." Another voice chimed in, "You threatened to evict me over a dandelion." A chorus of angry murmurs followed. Karen didn't even blink. Grandpa didn't speak during the hearing, but I could feel him itching to jump in. Finally, Mrs. Delaney asked for closing statements. Karen gave none, but Grandpa stepped forward, not as a participant, but as a witness. "This neighborhood doesn't need tyrants," he said. "It needs gardeners. People who help things grow, not cut them down, because they don't fit a rule book written by one person." Karen built a machine of fear. We're here to dismantle it. The vote was quick, overwhelming. Karen was formally removed from all HOA responsibilities, banned from holding any future positions, and ordered to relinquish control over all HOA records, equipment, and funds. It wasn't a legal court, but it was binding by community consensus. And in Pine Needle Estates, that mattered more than any law book. Karen didn't say a word. She stood, adjusted her sunglasses, and walked away. For the first time in years, she didn't look powerful. She looked small. But the surprises weren't over. Just as people were packing up, a white sedan pulled into the park's side entrance. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, actual federal agents. They asked for Karen. Someone pointed. She froze halfway to her house. The agents approached her calmly. One showed a badge. The other read her rights. Cameras came out. Phones recorded. And just like that, she was led away. No handcuffs. No shouting. Just silence and the weight of everything finally catching up. Turns out, her surveillance wasn't just a local issue. Some of that data had been sold, real estate agencies, insurance companies, even political campaigns. She'd gone beyond HOA misconduct into full-blown privacy violations and federal crimes. The neighborhood was stunned, vindicated, a little terrified. But mostly, they were ready to start fresh. And in the aftermath, Grandpa, reluctantly, accepted a temporary leadership role. Not president. He called himself the resident referee. Said his only job was to make sure no one ever got fined for a lawn gnome again without a full hearing. We rewrote the HOA rules from scratch, with real community input, transparency, humor. One rule now reads, any future HOA president must be able to parallel park, make a decent pot of chili, and promise never to install hidden cameras in lawn ornaments. Karen's house eventually went up for sale. Rumor was she moved to a retirement village in Florida, one without an HOA. The irony was delicious. Pine Needle Estates wasn't perfect, but it was real again, lively, a little messy, and finally ours. The trucks were gone, hauled off by the sheriff's office one bright Wednesday morning, while half the neighborhood stood in their robes sipping coffee and pretending they just happened to be out walking. Grandpa watched from the porch with his arms crossed, nodding once when the second truck disappeared around the corner like a general satisfied with the cleanup after a battle. I think he would have lit a cigar if Mom hadn't made him promise to quit last spring. Still, There was a glint in his eyes that hadn't been there for years, like someone had flipped a switch inside him. Maybe because, for the first time since we'd moved into Pine Needle Estates, he didn't feel like the old guy in the neighborhood. He felt like the protector of it. A defender of driveways and garages, and everyone's right to keep flamingo lawn ornaments in peace. Without Karen breathing down everyone's neck, the neighborhood felt lighter. Kids played louder, front yards became living rooms, and neighbors who hadn't spoken in years suddenly found things to talk about. There was a block party that weekend, completely spontaneous, organized by 3 moms on Facebook and 1 retired guy who owned a bounce house business. Grandpa was given a makeshift sash that said neighborhood hero and an aluminum crown that had clearly once been a pie tin. He wore it the whole day and pretended not to like the attention, but I saw him posing with at least 6 different families and 1 guy's dog. And just when it seemed like peace had finally settled in, something buzzed through the sky. At first, we thought it was a bird, maybe a hawk or a crow, but the movement was too mechanical, too precise. It zipped low, hovered, then circled the park where the bounce house squealed with children's laughter. That's when we saw it. A drone. Not a toy one either, but a real piece of tech, sleek, fast, with a small blinking light and a tiny camera that seemed to stare straight at us. People stopped dancing. The music hiccuped to a halt. Someone yelled, "Is that one of Karen's?" And everyone ducked instinctively. Grandpa stood still, eyes locked on the drone like he was tracking a missile. Then he did the most grandpa thing imaginable. He picked up a loaf of French bread from the snack table, aimed, and chucked it at the drone like a javelin. It didn't hit, but the crowd cheered anyway. The drone zipped higher, retreated, then disappeared over the rooftops. That night, Grandpa sat on the back porch, flipping through an old notebook and muttering to himself. I sat beside him, waiting. Finally, he closed the notebook with a sigh. "She's still trying," he said. "Karen doesn't need a title to be a menace. She's got her claws in this place. Just hiding now, licking her wounds, planning something stupid." It turned out he was right. Over the next week, odd things started happening. Strange notices left on doors, unsigned, with warnings about non-compliant decorations. A couple of homes received anonymous letters pointing out minor code violations that weren't even part of the new HOA guidelines. Someone even got a citation for excessive wind chime enthusiasm, which was clearly a callback to the Karen era. There were no names on these notes, no official stamps. But the handwriting was unmistakably hers. Karen had gone rogue. So Grandpa set a trap. He spent 2 days setting up a fake construction project in our front yard, complete with caution tape, plastic cones, and a suspiciously loud cement mixer he borrowed from a guy named Reggie, who owed him a favor from the squirrel incident. He even made up fake documents with exaggerated zoning violations and left them on the porch where a nosy ex-HOA tyrant might sneak a look. Sure enough, the drone came back. This time, Grandpa was ready. He had rigged a net launcher. Yes, a literal net launcher, hidden in a lawn gnome. When the drone hovered to scan the documents, Grandpa gave the signal. I hit the trigger. The net fired, snagged the drone midair, and brought it crashing to the lawn. We dismantled the drone that night on the kitchen table like it was a science project from a spy thriller. Inside was a memory card, and on it were files, videos, notes, even a few scanned copies of new HOA orders Karen had apparently been crafting on her own letterhead. She was trying to form a rival HOA, a shadow version, underground, unofficial, and still very much obsessed with regulations. We decided to return the favor. If she wanted to keep playing secret agent, then we'd give her a finale she'd never forget. Grandpa printed out every fake violation she drafted, tied them with a red ribbon, and delivered them in a cake box marked, "From your biggest fans." He dropped it on her porch just before dawn and taped a note on the lid. "Next time, try frosting." Karen moved out 2 weeks later. No for sale sign. No goodbye. One day her car was gone, and by that evening, the windows were empty and the house was silent. Rumors swirled. Some said she'd moved to a condo on the other side of town. Others claimed she'd taken a job consulting for another HOA in a different county. Grandpa said she probably joined a witness protection program for overzealous suburban tyrants. I just liked that she was gone. Life returned to a new normal, better than the one before. The new HOA committee was made up of volunteers who actually listened, and the first thing they did was pass what they called the sanity clause. No surveillance, no anonymous notes, and absolutely no more fines for inflatable holiday decorations. Grandpa declined a permanent role on the committee, but agreed to be an advisor emeritus, which meant he got to veto any idea that smelled like tyranny and got free cinnamon rolls at every meeting. One day, while cleaning out our garage, finally free of strange trucks and surveillance equipment, we found something wedged behind the water heater. A metal lunchbox. Inside was a single cassette tape labeled "For When It's Over." Grandpa raised an eyebrow, popped it into an old player, and hit play. Karen's voice crackled through, reading off a list of grievances like it was her final will and testament. "You'll miss me," she said. "One day, this neighborhood will fall apart without someone keeping it in line." We laughed so hard we had to sit down. Grandpa rewound the tape, listened again, and then tossed it into the trash. "She's wrong," he said. "We don't need someone keeping us in line. We just need to know we can count on each other." And he was right. The strength of a community doesn't come from rules or fines or clipboards. It comes from knowing the guy next door will help fix your fence, the lady across the street will feed your cat if you're out of town, and that if someone ever tries to park 2 unauthorized trucks in your garage again, the entire block will be there to lock the door and call the sheriff together. And just like that, Pine Needle Estates didn't just survive the Karen era. It thrived after it, with gnomes, wind chimes, geese, disco balls, and one very smug old man who proved once, and for all that sometimes, the best way to keep a neighborhood safe is to trust the people in it, even if it takes a net launcher hidden inside a lawn gnome to remind everyone how strong a community can be.